frame. Aside from the content-related evidence for validity, we have the criterion-related evidence. This refers to the degree to which the test scores agree with an external criterion. What do we mean by this external criterion? So when say external criterion, we are referring, of course, to the relationship between an assessment and another measure of the same trait. Or when we say another measure of the same trait, we are talking about another assessment tool. So, for example, if you would like to know if an assessment is valid based on criterion related evidence, you could compare the student's performance versus the IQ, which was derived from a standard test. So that's a comparison between the performance of the learner, the current performance of the learner, and his acquired IQ level based on the standardized test. So there are three types of criteria. First, we have achievement test. Second, we have ratings, grades, and other numerical judgment made by the teacher. Third, we have career data. So this example on your screen are topics which were tackled prior to this session. So when we talk about career data, we had an example before that refers to uh, the college admission test. Okay, that could be classified under number three, achievement test. Example is the National Achievement Test given by the Department of Education. Okay, in ratings, grades, and other numerical judgment made by the teacher are the other types of criteria. Now, two types of criterion-related evidence, as you see on your screen, are concurrent validity and predictive validity. When we say concurrent validity, this provides an estimate of a student's current performance in relation to a previously related or established measure. So one good example here is a school's newly developed intelligence test versus a standard IQ test. So if you would like to know if the standard test you have created is valid, let's say for instance, one school A crafted a standard intelligence test. If you, the school A, or if school A would like to know if that intelligence test made by the school is valid, there will be a comparison on the score of the learner on that test versus the score of the learner on a standard IQ test. If both reaches almost the same, or the same, should we say, okay, if not almost the same score, and proven to be statistically related, then the standard IQ test made by the school could be concluded as valid. Well, for predictive validity, we are talking about the power or usefulness of test scores to predict future performance. So example nga is the score in entrance or admission examination as predictor in college performance. Okay, I also remember before we have the NCAE, okay, National College Admission Examination. I'm not sure with the name of the initials, but it's labeled as NCAE, providing the learners with a possible career track they could pursue when they move to college. It gives them an idea after taking the test. Results will show, okay, giving an idea, an insight to the test taker on the skills, the aspects which are considered to be his or her strength. It's very important also to note that in relating this data, like current performance versus an established measure or admission score versus college performance, Okay, that's for concurrent validity and predictive validity. The Pearson correlation coefficient or Spearman's rank order correlation may be used. So this refers to the statistical computation. So when we talk about correlational analysis, one type is the Spearman's rank order. However, the square of correlation, or represented by r squared, is called the coefficient of determination, does not automatically represent to be the sole determinant or factor of the performance. So for example, if you have the student's grades, okay, it could be explained that this scores in their entrance examination could affect, okay, could correlate, or should I say, I'd like to correct, those entrance examination scores could correlate to the student's grades, but it is not a sole determinant. Okay, so we could only attribute maybe 25% of the student's grades, okay, which could be explained by their scores in their entrance examination. So again, talking about validity using criterion-related evidence. Next is the construct-related evidence. So this construct means an individual characteristic that explains some aspect of behavior. And when we talk about construct related evidence, if we are referring to individual characteristic or trait, then this refers to the assessment of the quality of the instrument used, whether it measures the extent to which the assessment is a meaningful measure of an observable trait or characteristic. There are three types of construct related evidence. So it could be theoretical, it could be logical, it could be statistical. Example for construct related evidence is assessing motivation to learn. So that's the individual characteristic, okay, in which one may find that the data on task value and achievement goals may be consistent or aligned with the theory of construct. Like your level of motivation correlates with the task value and achievement goals that you have. Another example is testing the math skills of math students and social studies students. You would expect, of course, that the math skills of math students is higher compared to the students of social studies, and that will make your test valid because hello, you have the math students taking the math examination. Obviously, they would get higher scores. Now, if the social studies students would get higher score than the math students, there's something wrong. And that's what you need to investigate. And in that case, your test is not yet considered to be valid because that is what is not expected. That's why we call it construct-related evidence. Okay? We are testing the validity depending on the individual characteristic of the test or individual characteristic that explains some aspect of behavior. To understand more about construct related evidence, we could have another example, such as the pre-test versus the post-test score for giving an intervention or a technique, a strategy. This is usually done for experimental method of research. Like the teacher would introduce a new strategy, a new technique, and then prior to introducing that, there will be a pre-test, of course, to gain the scores, and it will be compared to the post-test. So when say post-test, it's a test, an assessment provided after the learners are exposed to that intervention, that strategy, that technique introduced by the teacher. If there is a change between the pre-test, okay, like there is an improved score from pre-test to post-test, then we can say that the intervention is effective, and that could stand as a logical evidence for construct validity since the trait or characteristic has changed from pre-test to post-test. So there is a need for framework. That's very important. Based on our examples, there is a need for a framework to compare constructs. That's the theoretical part. And then it must be computed. Of course, like computing for pre-test versus post-test results. So that's something statistical. And showing the results that are consistent with the traits, making this construct-related evidence for validity logical. Again, those are the three types of construct-related evidence. The two methods in establishing construct validity, I repeat, the two methods in establishing construct validity are convergent and divergent. So in simple terms, convergent validity occurs when measures of constructs that are in fact observed to be related. So if you've seen that the result shows that the constructs, okay, based on the scores, the measures, are observed to be related. And it's the opposite of divergent or discriminant validity, which occurs when constructs are unrelated. Okay, I repeat, when constructs that are unrelated are in reality observed not to be. So it's like proving that when they are connected or related, the numbers, the scores would show that they are really related. Then that's convergent validity. And if you are expecting that they will should not never be related or logically based on your assessment, okay, commonly these two factors or two objects are not related to each other, and based on the scores, it showed, okay, that they are not related. Then that's divergent or discriminant validity. To understand more about this one, a good example is when a test administered to measure knowledge and skills in geometrical reasoning, which is far different from a reading construct. However, or therefore, we could say that comparison of test results from these two constructs will show lack of communality, meaning it is characterized by collective ownership. This is what we mean by discriminant validity. It's very impossible that you uh, measure the knowledge and skills in geometrical reasoning, okay, which is far from a reading construct. So how would you expect that there will be a connection or there will be relationship between the two? Though in some studies they are saying that language and mathematics are two different aspects, but in some studies they are saying, or there had been studies that proving that if you are good in language, you may also be good in math. Okay, well, for us to know, we conduct our own study because there are different claims regarding language and mathematics. Convergent validity in here is obtained when the test scores geometrical reasoning turn out to be highly correlated to scores from another geometry test measuring the same construct. Okay, so I repeat, divergent or discriminant validity if it shows that geometrical reasoning does not correlate or is unrelated to uh, the reading construct, which is about reading, of course. Okay. Now, another example for convergent, if geometrical reasoning turns out to be highly correlated, okay, or related to another geometry test measuring the same construct. So those are examples for convergent and divergent validity. Next is the unified concept of validity. This integrates considerations of content, criteria, and consequences into a construct framework for the empirical testing of rational hypotheses about score meaning and theoretically relevant relationships. Lessig in 1989 introduces concept of unified validity, which according to the screen or based as you can see on your screen, integrates considerations of content, criteria, and consequences into a construct framework. Now, according to Messick, There are six distinct aspects of construct validity. Like we have content, we have substantive structural, we have we have generalizability, we have external and consequential. Now for content, we refer to having parallelism. Okay, for content, this is parallel to content related evidence, and you know very well what we mean by content related evidence, that it becomes valid if what you are assessing is based on the content which you have taught. Okay, based on the content specified in your table of specification. Okay, so this calls out for content relevance and representativeness, like what you have taught, what you have relayed, the content that you have relayed to your learners should be represented in the assessment tool. Next is substantive. This pertains to the theoretical constructs and empirical evidences. We also have structural. This assesses how well the scoring structure matches the construct domain. We also have generalizability, which examines how score, properties, and interpretations generalize to and across population groups, contexts, and tasks. We also have external, which is related to criterion-related evidence of validity, and this includes convergent and divergent evidences of validity taken from the multi-trait, multi-method studies. And lastly, we have consequential, which pertains to the intended and unintended effects of assessment on teaching and learning, as in the social consequences of testing, which may be positive if it leads to improved educational qualities, or it could also be negative if it besets, okay, if it beset with bias in scoring and interpretation. So again, that's what we mean by the unified concept of validity. So this is some sort of a summary or putting a validity into a nutshell. Next on our list, we have the validity of assessment methods. Under validity of assessment methods, it's very important that you know that when developing a performance assessment, you should involve the following steps. Again, this is not limited only to this suggested steps on your screen, but these are basic or necessary steps needed to be done or to be executed when developing performance assessment. First, define the purpose. Second, choose the activity. And third, develop the criteria for scoring. Definitely, we talk about rubric. If you would like to use rubric, we then use rubric. Okay, design it. If you don't want to design, then you adopt, okay, modify from those which are available online. Just make sure you know how to assess, you know how to assess which one is in good quality or not. Okay, so this three steps should be taken by the teacher. Okay, from numbers 1, 2, and 3, all of these three are important and we should not skip one. Okay, for number 1, yeah, it's define the purpose. You should have a purpose in mind. Okay, what's your purpose in assessing? What's your purpose in asking your learners to perform? Is the competency really requiring the learner to perform? Okay, baka naman mamaya it's only about recall and then you're asking them to perform. So I repeat, all of those principles like alignment, appropriateness, okay, we should consider them when we develop our performance assessment. Second, choose the activity. Okay, will it be a performance? Are they going to dance? Are they going to execute a skill in cooking, a skill in sewing? Okay, what type of performance do you want? Are they going to produce an output? Like if it's a project, okay? And then third, as mentioned here, develop the criteria for scoring. Aside from these steps, there are 5 recommendations in choosing the activity. Okay, the assessment activity. First, remember that the selected performance should reflect a valued activity. Second, the completion of performance assessments should provide also a valuable learning experience to our learners. So, with this recommendation, we could conclude that choosing the assessment method, the assessment tool, is really not as easy as what we think. It's not a piece of cake. We should be crucial and critical in deciding what type of assessment we are going to give. Okay, aside from the first two recommendations, another recommendation is that we should align, okay, we should align the goals and objectives, okay, with the measurable outcomes, okay, having the principle of smarts, and again, alignment of the assessment to the objectives. Fourth, the task should not examine extraneous or unintended variable. Measure what is intended to be measured. That's why we call it validity. Performance assessment should be fair and free from bias. And in order to avoid these biases, you use rubrics, you use rating scale, you use checklist. At least the expectations are clear, and you're not guessing about the scores which you are going to give because you have your reference. As stated in your rubrics, your criteria, your rating scale, your checklist. So, in order to increase the validity, we have other reminders, okay, to remember. That's why we call them reminders. First, avoid personal idiosyncrasies in assessment, such as focusing on handwriting instead of the content of the essay. So if your focus is on the content and it's not a language class and it's not a language lesson, then focus on the content. You may give feedback about the handwriting, but in terms of scoring, focus on the content. That's why the use of rubric is very important for us to be guided what we are really measuring and for your learners to know what you are really measuring. Because if you will grade this output based on their handwriting and your instructions only talk about the content, only ask for the content, then your test and the test result will be invalid. Okay. Second, in controlled conditions, remember that oral questioning has high validity, okay, compared to the paper pen test. Okay. There is a high validity for oral questioning if there is a controlled condition because it's already there, the learners are there, and you ask based on uh, the need, according to the need of the situation. Remember, another reminder, in scoring performance, a rubric or rating scale has to be created, that's given. For observations, it becomes highly valid if results are recorded and interpreted. That's why we keep anecdotal record every day. So we do not rely on our memory because most of the time, not just sometimes, our memory fails. Okay, fifth, if observation is used with other assessment tools, it becomes more valid, like a combination of observation, then you have a paper pen test, okay, or objective type of test, and then you have performance test. That's what you call triangulation. Like you base the learning, you base your decision using three different methods on the same content, assessing the same content. I repeat, this is called triangulation. Next, validity in self-assessment is described as agreement between the self-assessment rating with the teacher and peer judgment. So this is some sort of verifying if you are going to use self-assessment, ask your learners to assess themselves. Verify their assessment versus your assessment versus the assessment of their peers. Like in a classroom observation or like in the measuring the performance of a teacher, the administration would ask the dean to observe. Then the dean has her own score for the teacher. The learners will also be asked to assess. Then the learners will have a separate score for the teacher, and the teachers will also be asked to assess themselves. So all of those three factors or three scores coming from three different groups or people will be added, will be computed with percentages, of course, And the final score will be the teacher's rating performance. Okay, so there should be some sort of different perspectives if it's about self-assessment, like viewing yourself using different lenses. So I repeat, for self-assessment, student must be informed of the domain in which they will assess themselves to increase validity. So there should be orientation, there should be training for these learners in order for them to know how to answer, how to accomplish the assessment tool. So they must be taught how to be objective, because let's say if I will be asked to assess myself and I want to get a high score, I will just immediately put 5 or place 5, mark 5 on my assessment rating sheet. Okay, you should teach them the value of honesty, the value of becoming objective when assessing themselves, in order for them to know how to provide also constructive feedback, or how to provide reliable data in terms of improving themselves. Remember that no single type of assessment method can test a vast array of learning and development outcomes, and that's the reason why we use different assessment methods. And you know this, that when it comes to performance tasks, of course, you would like to gauge the skill. If it's the skill that you are assessing, it's impossible that you are going to do a paper pen test if it's about skill. Example, skill in playing volleyball. If that's what you're going to assess, then ask the learner to play volleyball. Not a paper pen test defining some terms, defining some rules about volleyball, because you are talking about the skill in playing volleyball. After discussing the validity of assessment methods, we move now to the threats to validity. On your screen, you would see uh, the summary of the possible threats to validity. First, unclear test directions. Of course, if they do not understand the test directions, they will answer the items incorrectly because they do not understand the direction. So it doesn't mean that they answered your items wrongly, automatically they do not know the item. It could be because of your test direction. Second, complicated vocabulary and sentence structure. Just like what I mentioned, if you could write your instructions in short sentences, then that would be the best. Okay? Giving the examination is not about highfalutin word, or not about using complicated vocabulary, unless the intention is about vocabulary enhancement. But when we are talking about a regular test item, make sure that the terminologies, or the vocabulary, the language you are using is within the level of the readers. That's how we write, okay? And that's how we create an assessment. Avoid also ambiguous statements, okay? Inadequate time limits. You know this very well. There should be a match between the type of test and the time provided for them to accomplish the test. Inappropriate level of difficulty of test items may be all of the items are moving or anchoring on the higher order thinking skills, and then with a limited time. So there is this what we call inappropriate level of difficulty of test items. The test is too short could also be a threat, because like if you have the entire grading or 2.5 months and you only have 10 items for the assessment, that's definitely invalid because it's too short given the time frame. Improper arrangement of items. Again, like what I've suggested before, the first few items, okay, in your assessment tool should be the easiest items. So do not place immediately the difficult items on the first number. Okay, this is to give them some sort of motivation to continue answering. Next is identifiable pattern of answers, like if it's a multiple choice type of test, and then every time you give that type of test, it's always letter A. So immediately they could identify the pattern. So do not use this one. Or there are some examination using this what we call technique of creating or constructing a word if it's a multiple choice type of test, that in answering when they are writing the letter on column A, there is this some sort of pattern that like they need to uh, construct a word based from the choices. Of course, even if you do not know the other items in column A, okay, immediately if you know to which word the choices are leaning to, you could immediately guess the word and write the letter of your choice because you already know what could be, or you could already predict the possible word, okay, that is about to be completed using those